welcome to today's video, in which we're going to discuss Sometime in New York City, which is due for its 50th anniversary, the album from John Lennon and Yoko Ono in 1972. And I'm joined by Matt Williamson from Pop Goes the 60s. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, John.
Is the second video we've done in together. We first of all on Pop Goes the 60s channel, we discussed Ram, and now we're going to discuss a Lennon and Yoko album, which is probably more controversial than Ram was in many ways, but we'll get to that. So welcome, Matt. How's it going?
Well, it's going great, John. Thanks. This is going to be a fun series, so I'm very happy to do this album, which I think is it is a controversial album, and in my opinion, it's probably the most embarrassing solo album of any Beatles album. And that's taken in some territory. So what I want to do in this video is offer some context as to why I believe that, based on the political climate that the album was based on and the musicality and lyrical content of the album. So there is some background we probably need to fill in our viewers as to why this basically was recorded in the fashion it was and how John and Yoko came to be in New York City in late 1971.
Yeah, well, as we saw in the Imagined film, they were living in this huge house in Ascot, Tittenhurst Park, where they recorded Imagine. And one would have thought with such a nice house that they would stay there forever. But I guess they were falling in love with New York anyway and coming back and forth a lot because they had business here and because Yoko's daughter Kyoko was in the States, and they had a custody battle with Yoko's former husband, Tony Cox. So basically, when they flew to the States in September of '71, I think for one reason or another, they just decided to stay, and they were holed up in the, is it the St. Regis Hotel in Manhattan on the top floor for a while, and then before moving down into the village.
Yeah, and I think the reason they stayed was there was a lot going on in the village at that time, and activists Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman quickly descended upon John and Yoko. These guys, for those who don't know, they were political activists that were very much involved in what I would call political theater, and they were media hounds and really got a lot of attention for their causes. And obviously having John and Yoko as a part of it would certainly help the cause. So one of the first things that they did, what John and Yoko did with Hoffman and Rubin, was attend a John Sinclair rally in Michigan. And that rally was so successful, Sinclair was released a couple days later. We'll get into the Sinclair issue a little bit later as we talk about some of these songs. There was also another song called Angela, based on Angela Davis. There was a rally for her, and that went well. She was also released as well. So I think what was going on here, John and Yoko, I think, felt at the height of their powers as far as being influential in media. I think that really drove the reason to have a completely political album in this fashion.
And talking of the village, is it true, was Bob Dylan living there at the time as well? I think I'm right in saying he was.
Oh, I don't know.
I know in the David Wigg interview, John is saying it's where all the poets and artists hang out down in the village.
Well, I know that the Greenwich Village was a haven for artists really even before World War II. So in the 60s, obviously that became probably the folk capital of the world. And it just continued to draw artists. So maybe he's referring to some other people. I thought Dylan was upstate, but I could be wrong about that.
I know he spent quite a lot of time in the village doing gigs in the early 60s. And I seem to remember reading some reports that John and Yoko met up with him. And actually McCartney as well met up with Dylan when he was in New York. But obviously Manhattan's a big place, and I could be wrong if it was in the village or somewhere else. But when I was in New York, couple of stories really. One, I found some bloody good secondhand record shops down in the village.
I bet.
I was very pleased about that. And then secondly, I was with my sons, and we just come back off the ferry from the Statue of Liberty, and it dropped us off at the bottom of Manhattan. So I thought, okay, we're going to walk to Bank Street to have a look at John and Yoko's apartment, thinking it was a 15-minute walk. And it took us the best part of an hour with a stop at McDonald's on the way to rest our legs. And when we got there was no plaque, no nothing. You wouldn't have known that John Lennon had lived there. A very modest, what looked like a 2-up, 2-down apartment. We nearly rang on the doorbell and said to the owner, yeah, do you realize who lived here before you? But we didn't, but we took a few pictures and it was fun. So next time you're in Manhattan, Matt, 105 Bank Street.
I will check that out. Thank you, John. Okay, well, let's get into a little bit of the background. I want to start by listing some of the reviews. Of any Beatle album, this probably got the most scathing reviews, and I'm going to give a few negative and a few positive here. So let me just go into those real quick so people get a feel for what was being said at the time. Okay, so one of the problems with this album is that when it came out, some of these political issues had been resolved. So this album had the feel, at best, as old news. So here's what Stephen Holden wrote. The Lennons should be commended for their daring, but not before calling the album insipid artistic suicide. Holden added, except for John Sinclair, the songs are awful, and the tunes are shallow and derivative, and the words little more than sloppy nursery rhymes that patronize the issues and individuals they seek to exalt. Only a monomaniacal smugness could allow the Lennons to think this witless doggerel wouldn't insult the intelligence and feelings of any audience. So that is a fairly strong-worded negative review. In the NME, Tony Tyler presented his album review in the form of an open letter titled, Lennon, You're a Pathetic Aging Revolutionary. More recently, Gary Mulholland of Uncut Magazine has described Sometime in New York City as, quote, a contender for the worst LP by a major musical figure. Its 70s left-wing cliches are hamstrung by the utter absence of conviction within the melodies and lyrics. And finally, we have writing in the Boston Phoenix in 2005. Elliot Wilder said that listening to the album was a painful experience. Although he conceded that Lennon had his heart in the right place, Wilder opined, these tracks, pedantic, topical, elitist, show that a latter-day Dylan he was not. So he got hammered. Now, some positive reviews. So here's one, David Marsh gave kind of a mixed review here, I guess, stating that it's not half bad, 49.9% bad, but not half bad. More impressed, Mark Kemp of Pace considered that the album has been unfairly chastised, identifying Woman is the End of the World as one of Lennon's finest songs, and Ono's Born in a Prison as another highlight. AllMusic.com suggests that the richness of Phil Spector's production fills out the danceable grooves in nearly every track. Sometime in New York City is some of the groovinest, most tuneful agit-prop ever committed to disc. An agit-prop is shorthand for agitation propaganda. So there you have some positives, some negatives, and let's go into the songs, because taking that as a song-by-song basis is probably the best way to look at this album, at least up close.
I got this album back in the late 70s, got all the Lennon albums before he died. So I was 14, 15, something like that. And I found it fascinating just to look at historically with the newspaper cover, way before my time, but obviously the Irish issue was still big in Britain in the late 70s, becoming even bigger. And I just see this as a very interesting stage on Lennon's life path, and I know you think that he just changed like the wind and went through phase after phase, but I look at it a bit less critically in terms of, I think he developed as a human being in his life. He made mistakes like all of us, but he had to go through this political phase, and he came out the other side and obviously regretted it. But I think secretly he was glad he did it. And when in 1980, David Sheff, who interviewed him for Playboy, showed him the album cover, he was just gazing at it and saying, man, it's nice to see this again. So I can't defend the live disc much, but I'll defend the studio album. I think it's quite interesting, and musically as well.
Yeah, I would say this album is somewhat of a time capsule piece. And I'm actually harder on Lennon. It's easy to be hard on him politically if you're, it's that's the easy part. But musically, I coming after the #1 album, Imagine, I really think this took just a step off the cliff. And just based on a musical perspective, I don't know what he was thinking. He wasn't trying to be musical, I guess is what I get out of it. The focus was on the politics. That's why it's judged so harshly, I think.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's quite gutsy, and no one can accuse this album of sentimentality. And he's certainly not trying to be commercial. He's saying what he believes in, or at the time, and he got crucified for it, commercially speaking,
Yeah.
in terms of sales. But I wouldn't be without it.
Yeah, he put it all on the line. I'll give him that. So not everybody would do that. He didn't really spare anything on this album, and especially with the leadoff single, "Woman is the End of the World." So I mean, he could have started with a much more mellow single, but he didn't. So your thoughts on that song, John?
Yeah, just before I go to that song, you've read this book, haven't you? Come Together?
No, I have not read that book.
This is looking at Lennon mainly politically speaking, and obviously sometime New York City is a crucial part of the story. I find it one of the best books on Lennon out of all of them, actually.
I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, so "Woman is the End of the World." I think Phil Spector's production is magnificent. He's just got God knows how many drummers, at least two, sounds like about five. Strings. I think Lennon's words are a little bit awkward. I think his heart is in the right place. I think it's a brave feminist song at the time when not many male rock stars were singing about this topic. Let's put it like that. You wouldn't catch. I was going to say you wouldn't catch the Rolling Stones singing about this, but on the other hand, they do a song on Exile on Main Street called Sweet Black Angel, which is about Angela Davis as well. So, but the way Jagger always sings, he always, you can't hear the lyrics anyway. So half the people probably missed that. But yeah, I think that the Elephant's Memory plays pretty well on this track. And I know my friend Dave Costello says the sax playing is awful. I don't think it's awful. I think it's gritty. I think the guitar solo from Wayne Tex Gabriel in the middle is great. And yeah, I think the strings combined with the big sound work. So on the whole, I quite like it. I can see why it didn't chart very well.
Yeah, I don't know. I hate this song, actually. I think it's as boring of a song as Lennon has ever written. And I don't think Spector, as good as his production is, can save it. It goes on, it's over 5 minutes, and it's just, aside from the content or the lyrics, which aren't very good anyway, he obviously took, feminists liked it, but American blacks didn't care for the comparison, slavery to feminism. And obviously Lennon had some black supporters on this song, but it's just a song that I thought not only was a poor choice of a single, I just think it's a poor song. And I think it's the only reason it's talked about now is because it uses the N-word.
Well, it's interesting because my son Richie is at Kingston University in the UK, and some of his flatmates think John Lennon is a racist because of this song and a wife beater because of a couple of stories about what he did to early girlfriends and Cynthia maybe. And that's all they think about John Lennon. They don't have any other opinion of him. So it's kind of interesting what people pick up on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think obviously we know where Lennon was coming from with this song and where Yoko was coming from with this song. This was actually a quote from Yoko that the song was built upon. So yeah, that's why I wanted to have a little deeper discussion of this album, because there is some perspective by which to praise it and to ridicule it. And I don't really ridicule the song for use of the N-word, although it was controversial at the time. It was used, that word was used semi-regularly on American television by both blacks and whites in sitcoms and in dramas. So it was not up beyond the pale. It did chart at number 57 on the Billboard chart in the US, and that's the lowest charting single of any John Lennon single in his lifetime. So I think, had it been a great sounding song, that it may have done better, but I think it had a lot going against it the musicality being one of them, the lyrical content being the other one.
Yeah, and I don't think he even made it out as a single in the UK. And one can imagine Alan Klein's reaction to this record, you know, following the blockbuster success of Imagine. He must have kind of despaired at the direction Lennon was taking.
Yeah, I wonder what Klein's opinion of this single was. I mean, I would think that he probably wouldn't have wanted to release it. I mean, he's a money man, so I don't know. I haven't heard any opinion of his on this song, but
I was thinking of his opinion on the album in general probably wouldn't have been that favorable. I'm guessing. I don't have any quotes from him either on that. Yeah, but I know one of the reasons they split up is because John wasn't happy. He wasn't pushing Yoko's career enough. I do know that.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know what he was expecting. Yoko was recording a lot of music during this time, more than her husband. And some say she was out producing her husband at this time. She had 3 double albums in a row. If you count this one, that would be 4. So it's not like she wasn't producing. I just,
you mean
I don't,
3, right? Fly, this one, and Approximately Infinite Universe.
the one after Approximately Infinite Universe is called, it's the one with she's the Sphinx.
Feeling the Space, but that's a single album.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, my mistake. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think some of her maybe art exhibits, those weren't being pushed. And I really don't know how big those could have been had they been pushed to the max. I don't know, but obviously that relationship crumbled.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, even if Klein had pushed her, I don't think you could see Yoko reaching the top of the charts. Although, having said that, you know, Walking on Thin Ice came close, didn't it? I mean, I think it or even did reach the top of one chart or another recently. And
well, yeah, her music in the 90s and early 2000s started to chart in the dance clubs. I mean, she actually has, I think, on the most #1 dance songs in the history, I think she's in the top 10 of having the most. So she stuck with it and really had a lot of success later on. But at this time, you know, she's more of a cult figure as far as music goes.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not quite in agreement on that song, so which brings us on to the second one, and I don't suppose we're going to be in agreement on this either, because I actually really like Sisters Oh Sisters. I think Yoko sings it pretty well, and it's a nice tune, and Spector's production is ballsy. The guitar solo in the middle sounds like Lennon to me rather than Wayne Tex Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had the good fortune to meet Yoko in 1998, when I was talking about this song, she specifically mentioned Phil Spector's production in terms of really helping this song come alive. Because I think there is a live version that they performed at the John Sinclair rally. I'm not sure if it's available on YouTube or not.
Mm-hmm. Don't know.
But I think that the album version is going to win hands down when you compare it to a live. A bit like Born in a Prison, because they tried Born in a Prison on the Madison Square Garden gig, and it doesn't come across so well live on the album as it does on the album. But anyway, I like Sisters Oh Sisters, and I even quite like that humorous thing at the beginning, male chauvinist pig engineer. I'm not sure who Yoko's referring to, but she's
yeah.
I
took that to be humorous as well, because then John Lennon says, "Right on, so tell him, sister," or something. To me, it just sounds cringy, and that's the problem with Lennon and Ono during this period. You know, they talked about being the clowns during the bed-in period and trying to sell peace and have some humor with it. I think that's hard to do with some of these political topics, and when they try to be humorous here, it just doesn't work, and that may be one of them. So, yeah, I mean, I always thought Yoko's voice, it sounded more like a kiddie song to me. I found it hard to take seriously.
But you like the backing, the Elephant's Memory on this track?
Yeah, I mean, Elephant's Memory, I think they're a good band. I've always thought that they are a much better fit for Yoko Ono's music than John Lennon's music. So they tend to shine more on her songs.
I'm just thinking if someone else had recorded this, like with someone with a more what's the word?
Commercial, like a more
More
commercial
commercial voice, maybe one of the big female singers of the day.
maybe.
It's a good tune. I mean, it's very catchy, and it's got a lot of energy.
Yeah,
This
maybe
is now,
Helen
this is
Reddy does this
now,
instead of "Woman Hear Me," "I Am Woman Hear Me Roar." Maybe this would have been the hits for Helen Reddy had she done it.
yeah, this is an album, by the way, that I think is you have to play loud, as the early Lennon singles instructed you to do. So I was listening to it in the car the other day and cranked up the volume and was singing along merrily to a lot of the tracks.
Yeah, I do believe this is a good song to listen to loud, and it's not really a headphone album, but yeah, the next song for sure I like to listen to loud, and that's Attica State. And this is one song I do like on the album. I know some people call it repetitive lyrics. I can't disagree with that, but I think it's just a fun song. And in spite of the fact the guitar riff is a complete ripoff of Elmore James' "Dust My Broom," it's still great. A lot of people have used that riff, so it totally works for me. And I thought it maybe could have been a single.
Yeah, I'm looking at the lyrics here. I thought Lennon sings "Free the prisoners, jail the judges," but on the sleeve here it says "Free the prisoners, free the judges."
Yeah, I know he said "free the prisoners," that's for sure.
Huh. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think this is a controversial song, and obviously the guy who
Yeah.
killed him, whose name we won't mention, is ironically in Attica State Prison to this day. I think at the time Lennon was on some talk show and got a pretty hard time from some audience members over this song, I seem to remember, and he was trying to defend himself. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's quite interesting.
I don't remember. I don't think I have seen that one. I have to check that one out. Yeah, he did it.
In the same talk show, some artist, some guy at the back said, "What do you think of Paul's new album?" Meaning Wildlife.
Oh,
And he says, I think it's okay. I think it's better than the last one. I think he's moving in the right direction. He was actually quite generous.
yes.
Surprisingly so, publicly, but about the first time he'd said a good word about Paul in 2 years.
Yeah, he started, this was the warming up period, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe it was because he was getting so much flack from this album. He took a lot of punishment, and he needed a little warmth, and maybe that's saying nice things about McCartney gave him that. At least it gave some fans that.
Well, no, this talk show was before the album came out.
What was it?
Because when Wildlife came out, it was December 71. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So but they had the famous meeting at I think it was at Bank Street, around the time of New Year, late December 71. And one would love to be a fly on the wall for that meeting, because apparently they got on pretty well, and they were not slagging. They agreed at that meeting not to slag each other off in public after that, which I find fascinating. Having spent most of 1971 doing exactly that.
Well, let's move on to the next song, "Born in a Prison." This is a Yoko song. And interesting song here for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's some Beatle author Chip Madiger and Mark Easter called the song contemptible, claiming it would be suitable for the 60s girl group The Shags. John Weiner called it painfully weak, and of the live version on video, reported that it's so awful it's embarrassing to watch. I don't think this song is as bad as they say. And John, you had mentioned, I think, this is one of the rare times we have John Lennon harmonizing with Yoko. And yeah. I think that I would have preferred John Lennon sing lead on this song. But what are your thoughts on this one, John?
Yeah, John Lennon singing lead. That's put a thought in my head. It doesn't strike me as his kind of style of song. Actually, you know what it reminded me of a little bit? The song from HMS Pinafore from Gilbert and Sullivan, Little Buttercup.
Oh.
They're both waltzes, and they both have a similar tune. which I thought was quite interesting. I like this song, particularly the album version. I think the live version, I think I remember hearing it, not being very impressed. But again, Spector's production is warm. Lennon's harmony vocal is spot on. And I think the tune is nice. And my son, Tommy, who doesn't like this album at all, really, he likes this song. So I think it's one of Yoko's more commercial efforts in the 70s anyway.
Mhm. Yes, I agree. All right, next song, we have New York City. And this is another song I thought could have been a candidate for a single. And it seems to be maybe the least political song on the album.
Yeah, I think potential single, but I mean I suppose the only criticism of it could be it's a little bit generic. It's just a kind of Chuck Berry style rocker. So it's not particularly original. And other people say it's a son of Ballad of John and Yoko, which I don't think is a bad thing at all, because I think both songs are very successful in capturing what was happening at the time. And the Staten Island Ferry making movies for the telly, and Fillmore and Apollo for Freedom, cycling through the village trying to shake our image, but we found that we'd left it back in London. I love it.
Mhm.
And I love the guitar solo from Wayne Tex Gabriel, and I love the piano solo, and I'm going to pronounce the guy's name correctly. Adam, bear with me.
Yeah, I've got it here too. I gotta scroll down.
Adam Ippolito.
Palito, yeah.
I hope I pronounced that right, Adam, if you're watching.
That sounds right.
Good piano solo. A lot of energy to this song. And I was thinking, one can't really imagine the Beatles, for example, playing this song. They could have obviously done a version of it, but this song has a very gutsy New York feel. Yeah.
It does. It does have a lot of energy, and it's it just has a real positive feel, more so than most of the other songs on the album, for me anyway.
Yeah.
All right, let's flip the record over, John, and we get into some Irish territory here with Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, this is interesting because this single event, which is now called Sunday Bloody Sunday, which happened in February 72, when 13 people were shot dead by British paratroopers at a demonstration. This single event inspired both Paul McCartney and John Lennon to put pen to paper. And I've always found that very interesting, because Paul, certainly in the 70s, was not very prone to doing anything political.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of his criticisms of Lennon's early solo work was he said it was too political. And then Lennon responded, well, you think Imagine ain't political? It was just Plasticona Band with chocolate on it for conservatives like yourself. So, but I think this song is a really successful collaboration between John and Yoko. I think I like Yoko's singing in the chorus. I think John's singing in the verse is strong. I love the way that Spector's got at least what it sounds like 3 drums pounding at the beginning, another one to play loud.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the lyrics, are pretty good. Is there anyone amongst you dare to blame it on the kids? Not a soldier boy was bleeding when they nailed the coffin lids. I think some of these words are quite effective.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the best song on the album. I think it's the most interesting lyrically. It's probably the best lyrics on the album. It's got a great funky feel, and Spector did a real nice job producing this. And aside from the musical backing, I know Yoko gets a lot of hate for her vocal delivery, but I love her singing on the chorus. I think it just kicks it into a higher gear. And it's maybe an acquired taste, but overall, I think the song is by far the most interesting and complex song on the album.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're both in agreement there.
Well, the only thing I would say that I would add is I know that Lennon, obviously the U2 song is kind of the de facto theme song of that event, replacing this song, if this song was ever in the running. but there was also some, Lennon took a little bit of heat, I think, as well on this song. Just, he was always claimed to be a pacifist, and he took this hardline support of the IRA in this and in the next song, Luck of the Irish.
Yeah, well, in Sunday Bloody Sunday, I don't think it's so much as a call to arms. Well, in a way it is, because it says repatriate to Britain all of those who call it home, leave Ireland for the Irish, not for London or for Rome. But I think he keeps the message sufficiently generic in terms of, he doesn't specifically support the IRA, but then in the Luck of the Irish, the words are a lot more controversial, and one can imagine people in Britain being seriously upset by this at the time. I got to it 7 years after it came out, so can't have a reaction for you from 1972. But why that? Whereas this famous verse with the why the hell are the English there anyway, as they kill with God on their side, blame it all on the kids and the IRA as the bastards commit genocide. Aye, genocide. I mean, that is a bit over the top. I mean, obviously, I know there's a long history to the Irish problem.
Yeah.
And the British didn't cover themselves in glory by any standards in the early days. But to basically equate it with something like the Holocaust or something is a little bit rich. So.
Yeah, I think that is the one song that got him in trouble in the UK anyway. Not so much here, but yeah, the genocide accusations are pretty over the top, and I guess his prestige nosedived as a result.
Yeah, it's funny because some of the verses are pretty harmless and quite moving. In the pool, which means Liverpool, they told us the story how the English divided the land, of the pain, the death, and the glory, and the poets of old Ireland. And then obviously the Yoko bits go off into this sickly sweet sentimentality. If we could make chains with the morning dew, the world would be like Galway Bay. Let's walk over rainbows like leprechauns. The world would be one big Blarney Stone.
Yeah, these lyrics are absolutely atrocious. The line that, yeah, Blarney Stone, leprechauns, really? I mean, there's another line in here that I want to ask you about, because it says, if you had the luck of the Irish, you'd be sorry and wish you were dead. You should have the luck of the Irish and you'd wish you was English instead. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If Irish people wish they were dead, what the hell is he saying? I mean, this is one of the earlier reviews called this album Sloppy Nursery Rhymes, and this is the perfect example of that review.
I can't even tell you what those lyrics are trying to say. I guess he's saying they had so much suffering that it's almost better you're better off dead than to go through all that pain. Maybe that's what he's saying.
Really?
Well, I'm just trying to interpret the words in front of me here, Matt.
Wow. Yeah, that, talk about a stretch. But anyway, yeah, it got him in trouble, obviously, in more ways than one. And it's songs like that make this album, it's just a black eye on this album, and make this album adds to the reputation the album has today.
But having said that, interesting, I think a couple of the live versions from December 71 are available on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do get this, if we do get an archive box set this year, one would almost wish that they would just junk the second live disc from 69 and the Zappa stuff, and just replace it with all the contemporary concerts he was doing, and obviously the one-to-one and all the interviews like the Mike Douglas and who's the other guy, Dick Cavett. There's loads of stuff. He was on TV all the time in 72.
Yeah. So
that there's a lot of potential extra archive material they could use. And but this song nearly went out as a single. I think they even got as far as to send it to a few radio stations, and then they just got such a bad reaction they pulled it.
I mean, that's how brazen I think Lennon was. Or, I mean, let's face it, Greenwich Village at that time, with all these radicals, that they were living in a bubble of impenetrable means. And this, to send a single out like that in England, I mean, that takes some balls or some naivete of epic proportions. I don't know what you call it, but I'm not surprised it wasn't released.
Yeah, but one could take the tune and write a kind of innocent nursery rhyme, and it would sound quite nice.
Yeah, you know, that song was the first song that caught my attention because I'm a sucker for Irish folk, British folk, and you know, Lennon never did a lot of that kind of stuff. But had he gone in that direction, I think that might have been interesting. But we're still, maybe would have been still left with the lyrics. But that's one of the only acoustic songs on the album, probably the only one.
Yeah, it reminds me of the when people talk about How Do You Sleep, everyone's talking about the McCartney references. They miss what a great song it is. And if those lyrics had been aimed at someone invisible, like the way Dylan used to do in Rolling Stone or positively 4th Street, and maybe How Do You Sleep would go down as an all-time classic. Whereas because of the connotations with McCartney, kind of dominates that's all everyone ever talks about. So this is maybe another good example where there's a good tune here, but is kind of ruined by the words.
Yeah, I agree. So the next song, we have John Sinclair. So the backstory on Sinclair is that he was a guy who was busted for 2 marijuana joints and got 10 years. And he was released shortly after a rally that John and Yoko attended in late 1971. He was released in December of 71. And this album came out about 7 months later. So I've always kind of liked this song. I loved Lennon's guitar playing in this song. That slide he's playing, I think, is great. I wish he could have done more with that.
Yeah, I think this is a great song, and I know I think you said last time that you you shortened the version on your playlist so that you had less gotcha, got to, but I quite liked it. I think the repetition is done deliberately because it emphasizes the message. We got to get him out of jail. To be sent to prison for 10 years for being in the possession of 2 marijuana joints is excessive, to say the least. So I'm glad he got released. We've said earlier that by the time this album came out, this was already old news, unfortunately. But I think it's an interesting song historically, and you know, to look back on.
Yeah, I actually like this song enough to edit some of those got to get. I took the time to do that, you know, just because it's annoying, and it's purposely annoying. And I think that's not the way to drive the point home. The set him free could have been the thing that was repeated. That's really what I think needs to be repeated, or that would drive the point home more. Anyway, it's just one of those songs here that I don't think he spent a lot of time on and banged it out for that rally probably, and that was it.
But you're right about Lennon's guitar. It's really good guitar work here.
Yeah, when he tried, he could instrumentally, he could really do some interesting things and unique things.
Yeah,
Nobody's gonna ever call him a virtuoso player, but I think that this is an example that had he put some more time into it instrumentally, this album could have been, he wouldn't have to just rely on the lyrical content, you know, and Spector's production. You know, it's hard to rely on just the producer to prop up the songs, but that's what Spector in essence had to do with this.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, grab your copy of Sometime in New York City, because I've just noticed on the back cover for The Luck of the Irish, it says Lennon Ono, November 72. Well, this album came out in June. So that must be a misprint. They must mean November 71, no?
Where are you reading that?
On the back cover, The Luck of the Irish is
You're
credited
right.
to Lennon Ono.
You're right. That is a misprint.
Yeah.
It should be November 71.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right. This album came out in June of 72. Or maybe this album was just that dated. I mean, could that be?
Oh, here's a song about the future, guys.
Yeah, things are looking even worse in the future.
Be interesting to know where that picture is taken from, that Luck of the Irish picture with the crosses. It looks like a kind of funeral picture, doesn't it?
It does, like a procession of sorts.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's too bad that, well, we can talk about the packaging a little later, but some of the photos are kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, my copy is in a really nice kind of cardboard texture, whereas I think my original copy was a reprint and it came in the kind of just standard white card. But this is thick. It almost looks like an old newspaper, my copy. So I was
Yeah,
quite happy.
my copy is the thick cardboard uh, sleeve as well. And the newsprint, they purposely did a lower resolution newsprint style of printing to make it look like a newspaper. I think the execution of this packaging is really good.
But your copy looks like a reissue because it's very white, right? Compared to mine.
It's pretty yellow around the edges.
Oh, okay.
And it's got, I do have the original stuff in here, so I'm not sure. It's got the postcard in it and
yeah, which is more than my copy has. Yeah.
stuff here. So I think, I don't know how often, if this was printed in later pressings, was there a need to even have later pressings? Or, these might have sat around for a while.
Well, the copy I bought in the UK in the late 70s did not come with the Fit to Die in a sleeve, and it did not come with the postcard. So I think you're probably right. You do have an original there. Yeah.
Yeah. So this postcard is inside.
It's quite interesting. You can miss the clenched fist if you don't look at it carefully, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. The clenched fist of
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of little subtleties in the artwork in this whole package, which is kind of fun to look at.
Yeah.
So moving on, we have the song Angela. Angela Davis had been acquitted in the summer of '72. She was accused of, I think, providing arms to some of the Black Panthers, and those guns were used to commit a murder. So she was on the run for a while. And this was another example of her being freed or exonerated prior to this album coming out.
Yeah. And interesting that this track made the recent Give Me Some Truth compilation.
Oh yes, that's right.
I'm not sure whether Sean was saving Women as the End for the archive release this year, because I guess Sean probably was the main person choosing the tracks. But good to see that song get some recognition, because I think it's really well produced by Phil Spector. I think the strings are lovely. It's John and Paul, not so much singing harmony, because they're kind of singing an octave apart, aren't they, I think? But their voices work well together.
John and Yoko, you mean?
Yeah. What did I say? John and Paul?
John and Paul.
Oh dear.
What would Freud think?
I don't know. Yes, and I can't really imagine John and Paul singing this song somehow.
Yeah.
But, let down a bit lyrically by they gave you coffee, they gave you tea, they gave you everything but equality. I mean, yeah. But a nice try. And as I said, the Stones did a song the same year on Exile on Main Street about Angela Davis. So that Sweet Black Angel, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, this is another one of the songs on the album that I think Spector did everything he could, but he still couldn't save it. I think Yoko's vocal ruins it. I think it's terrible. And not that John should have sang this one, but I don't know. It's just not, I just don't think it's a good song. I mean, again, their hearts are in the right spot, but lyrically it's clumsy. And it's over 4 minutes long, They could have done it probably in 2 minutes. That's my opinion.
But John and Yoko were mainly singing it together. So I don't find Yoko's vocals at all bad here. It's interesting that you say that. In the chorus, you can hear Lennon more than Yoko. And in the verse, I think the fact that Lennon's singing an octave below Yoko is quite effective.
Mm.
But you don't agree?
I guess I would rather just have John sing it, I think it would have just sounded better.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I have a little bit of bias towards of John's vocals over Yoko's, but
Can you imagine
let's take that there.
if we get this archive release, can you imagine if there's an early guide vocal version with Lennon singing the lead? That would be fascinating, wouldn't it?
Oh, that would be. Yeah, that would be.
I doubt there is, and I doubt it would be put out, to be honest. But it would be.
Well, it would be interesting to hear something stripped down like that. You know, it might give the feel of more of the Plastic Ono Band album, which may have been a. Inspector is it's stripped down completely on that album. You know, so he went the opposite direction on this.
These days, I guess technically it would be possible to do an isolated track of John's vocal here and remove Yoko's, no? They can do that kind of thing these days.
Well, the software, my understanding is that the software is just getting better and better. I think that some of the software that I've heard do this kind of thing, it doesn't render any high fidelity. Not that you could tell with this song, but I'm sure what is going to happen is you're going to start to see fans doing this kind of stuff. Like there's all kinds of deconstruction of Beatles songs. Those are fan-based videos that are done doing that. So I can see that happening for this record as well.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it, I'll live with this version. I'm happy with it. I think when they isolated John's harmony vocal on that Double Fantasy track, everybody has a woman who, as a man, was it?
Every man has a woman who loves him.
Yeah, when they isolated his vocal and they put it out on, I think it was one of Yoko's charity albums. It just sounded incomplete.
Oh, okay.
Because John's singing the harmony line and you kind of miss the melody line.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to We're All Water. By the way, I noticed your copy doesn't have the sticker on the front. My copy doesn't either. I did look on Discogs,
yes,
and there are copies with a huge sticker over the picture saying double, I think it says double LP pack or something.
Okay. Yeah, so that would have been right over here.
Yeah.
Over the Naked Nixon and Naked Mao. Yeah, so that was a controversial photo on the cover of this, which was censored in some markets, I suppose. This one, and the sticker was attached so that if you ripped it off, it would tear the backing of the album cover. So that wasn't very nice. But yeah, so I mean, I'm not nearly as offended by that photo as I am by the lyrics of the song. I think this is the worst song on the album, and comparing mass murderer Charles Manson to the Pope. I mean, can we be more over the top? And I mean, this song, and if you look on the track list, this is I've got a listing of this at 7 minutes 11 seconds, the same length as Hey Jude. What a way to close the album! You know, I there's nothing redeeming of this song I can say at all.
Yeah, I think it would have worked better as a punchy 3-minute number without the wailing at the end. I mean, it goes on at least 2 or 3 minutes too long at the end, as you said. One could have lived with, because I think the actual verses are quite good, and I think Elephant's Memory's playing it pretty well, and a lot of energy in it, but it just goes on way too long. I mean, Bruce Spicer in this book, The Beatles Solo on Apple Records, he says it's a badly played song. That was his exact words, I think. But, you know.
Yeah, and to close the album or the studio album on that track, I just, usually the Beatles, they typically use their strongest song to close an album on many cases. And this, I think, is the weakest song. So I don't know. I struggle just to listen to it twice to prepare for this video. So I think that's probably the last time I'll ever listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking it's quite interesting that Yoko's in the chorus going up quite a few notes and is struggling to reach those notes on the chorus. And I was thinking it's similar in a way to Happy Christmas, War is Over, which is obviously Yoko co-wrote, in the way that goes up in the chorus, that a very Merry Christmas, that bit. But it's obviously that's about all in common that those two tracks have. I think Yoko really struggles to reach the notes on the chorus, and the verses are a little more successful. But yeah, I take your point about the words, and who wants to glorify? Well, not that it's glorifying, but who wants to compare Charles Manson and the Pope? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that leaves us now to discuss the live disc. And generally, I just pretend it's not there. It's nothing I ever have liked to listen to. I gave it a full listen to prepare for this video. And one thing I would say, just coming away from it, is that you have a dream collaboration here of Zappa and Lennon, and the fact that nobody talks about this speaks volumes of the contents of what they recorded here.
Absolutely, and even the '69 Lyceum concert, there's a dream lineup hit there with George Harrison, Eric Clapton, John Lennon, Billy Preston, Jim Gordon, whole host of people, but they don't really improve it. I mean, and Cold Turkey is one of the least successful versions of it because Yoko is doing her wailing, and which I really just do not think adds to the song at all. Can you imagine if that wailing had been on the original single? I mean, it wouldn't have even charted, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, Yoko's wailing, I don't think ever adds to a song that's listenable for me personally. And I think that's the point of it.
If you're going to wail on your own song, not on someone else's. But I guess, they were married, so
yeah.
Of course you can sing on this song, Yoko.
Yeah, of course. Yes, honey, be my guest.
Yeah, and I don't listen to this disc at all, whether on vinyl back in the day or on CD now. I mean, obviously, that track at the beginning of side 2, Well, Baby, Please Don't Go, is semi-decent. But even that's ruined by Yoko's wailing, I'm afraid. And the Zappa stuff is just forgettable.
Yeah, I mean, Yoko Ono is actually somebody that Zappa probably would have worked with. He was always talk about challenging listeners. That's his move. And so, I mean, it might have worked in a live setting for the people that like that kind of thing, but on disc, it just does not work. I guess you had to be there. And I think making matters worse with this disc and this album in general is that Lennon and Ono got in trouble for putting their names on a Zappa song. And that was the song Jam Rag, which is actually the Mothers of Invention doing a Zappa song called King Kong.
So he came in and we talked for a few minutes, and I asked him whether he wanted to play with us at the concert at the Fillmore East that night, and he did. And we just happened to have a recording truck there because we were recording the shows for another purpose, and the tapes were made. Now here's the bad part. During the performance, when Lennon was on stage with Yoko, we played one of my songs called King Kong. And the deal that was made, according to the usage of the tapes, was he got to use the tapes for his purpose, I got to use the tapes for my purpose. He released part of that performance on an album called Sometime in New York and changed the name of the song King Kong to Jam Rag and gave himself and Yoko writing and publishing credit on the song. Now obviously this song has a melody and chord changes. Somebody did write it, and it was not them. So, whoops.
So when this album came out, that was just a mess because, Zappa, I don't know if he didn't sue them, but it kept Zappa from using his own music until like 20 years later. So it was a bit of a mess legally. But I think that the music was just so ramshackle. Lennon and Ono maybe didn't know it was Zappa's own song. Maybe they just thought, oh, we're just jamming here. Yeah, who knows? I mean, that's how disjointed and bad this collaboration was. So I'm willing to suggest that Lennon didn't know he was appropriating Zappa's song.
If you can call it a song.
Exactly.
What do they call it? Jam rag, because it's a jam and it's a piece of garbage, really. I mean, I'm sure they didn't think it was themselves. I'm sure they thought they were breaking new ground, but
Well, that's the problem with living in an echo chamber where they think every word they utter is some kind of profundity. And, this album was a total slap in the face, or the backlash and the reaction to it. We'll get to the fallout in a moment here. But yeah, I think this whole disc is as self-indulgent as any disc that came out in the 70s gets.
Yeah, I just like to clarify, because I wouldn't want viewers to think that I'm anti-Yoko after what I said about this live disc, because to clarify, I'm not a fan of the avant-garde Yoko much at all. Two Virgins, Unfinished Music, Wedding Album, and this stuff. But I have a lot of time for Approximately Infinite Universe. I think there's some great songs on there, and I think Season of Glass is a masterpiece. So when Yoko's good, she's compelling. It's just that when she's not good, frankly she's annoying. So I guess the same with any artist. You can't love everything they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're being kind, John. I don't think I feel the same way about Ono. I really like some of her solo music. I dislike almost everything she does in collaboration with John Lennon. To me, it's like oil and water, and it just doesn't go well together. And that's a criticism, and that's an opinion of mine. But at the same time, I hold some of her work on her solo albums as good quality stuff and interesting music, even though it's not commercial, it's not avant-garde. That word gets thrown around like a Nerf ball. It doesn't have meaning anymore. But it's just an acquired taste, and it's not for everybody. And I'm a little tired of the word misogyny being thrown around for an honest opinion about Yoko Ono's musical work. I won't take it.
Yeah. So were you even not happy with Double Fantasy as a collaboration?
Well, I mean, she's not on the same songs a lot with John. There's a separation. And that worked for me because I just kind of viewed it as Yoko solo, John solo. And in that sense, it worked for me. And Yoko's got some fine music on that. Yeah. At the time it came out, I was much younger and less tolerant of Yoko's style of music. And I just skipped over those songs. I just would have preferred all John Lennon. And it ended up being a swan song. So I don't know what an alternative would have sounded like, but
it's very interesting because at the time I was pretty annoyed that we got 7 songs from John only after 5 years of nothing.
Yeah.
Obviously it's better than nothing, but I was annoyed at the time, but over the years, I've grown to really, maybe it's got something to do with his murder, but I've grown to really appreciate Double Fantasy as a joint artistic statement, which works pretty well as a kind of reflection on the ups and downs of a relationship. And as I got older, I got to appreciate some of those lyrics more. It's not just all slush and sentimentality. Yoko's being quite negative on Moving On and Give Me Something.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think, John Lennon is always better about writing about himself. And I think Yoko is too. And when you look at sometime in New York City, when they're writing about the events of the day in a newspaper style fashion, it's nowhere near, they just don't have the conviction. They're not as invested. Because they dropped this stuff like a hot potato as soon as the album tanked.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you said, that critic who said, a latter day Dylan, he is not. Because at the time, Dylan had almost given up on politics, hadn't he, in the early 70s?
Yeah.
Although he did release that single, George Jackson, but it was fairly mild stuff compared to his earlier stuff.
Well, what makes Dylan so good is he plays his cards close to the vest. And Lennon, his 60s work with the Beatles, he takes on a much more surreal style of writing, which is often about him, but it's just far more interesting than this in-your-face, political stuff he went for here. There's no depth to it at all. It's so on the surface that it's so unlike Lennon. And it's just, that's why these critics call it childish, and I agree with them. It's just, it's beneath Lennon, actually. That kind of lyric writing is beneath him. His heart may have been in the right place. I'm not arguing about that, but.
And actually, now I think about it, I don't think Bob Dylan would agree that his earlier work was political, but I think the reason that some of his standards, like The Times They Are Changing, Blowing in the Wind, have lasted the test of time and will continue to last is because the lyrics are sufficiently generic. If he'd slagged off Kennedy specifically in those songs, it would have dated it. And it's a bit like Imagine, by keeping words sufficiently generic, it can appeal to generations to come, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Blowing in the Wind will always have a resonance because there's always a war going on somewhere. Actually, that's what I remember. Lennon said that to Andy Peebles 2 nights before he died. We were talking about the Happy Christmas single. And he said it's relevant every year because there's always someone getting tortured or shot. He said that literally two evenings before he died.
Yeah.
So ironic.
Very much so. Well, let me get back to the packaging here. I have a little thing here. Let me pull it up. And, oh, wait, I grabbed the wrong record. This is Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick that came out 3 months earlier. So, so I mean, I'm bringing that up just to underline the point of how dated this album was. Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick was the #1 album. And I don't understand how John and Yoko could have missed that fact. You could have made it, maybe you alter the album in a way that doesn't look so much like that. I mean, here they are side by side. So I could see that you might get them confused looking for them in the record bins.
You might even go home with the wrong record, right?
Yeah, some people who went home with the Jethro Tull record were pleasantly surprised, I imagine. So yeah, this album only got to number 48 in the States. It was in terms of an artist the size of John Lennon, this was a failure, a bomb. It followed at the #1 album, Imagine. It hit number 11 in the UK, so you guys seem to like it all right. But you guys can have it.
Yeah, I'm surprised it did that well, to be honest. But I guess number 11 by John's standards, well, actually by Imagine standards, it's not very good. But by Plastic Ono standards, that got to a similar number as well, didn't it? I think.
I think they got to number 3 in the States, maybe 6.
I mean, in the UK, okay, I'm talking.
Could be.
Maybe number 6. Maybe number 6. You're right. Yeah. But you know, sales is not everything. And as I said at the beginning, I wouldn't be without this album. I think it was a good experience for him to go through. I think it was an exciting time. If I'd lived in New York and I was anywhere over 15, I'd have been down in on the Lower East Side trying to stalk Mr. Lennon in a nice way.
Yes,
because he was visible. He was riding his bike around the place. He was going to bars, going to restaurants. Whereas in the later years, you got the feeling he was a little bit holed up in the Dakota.
Yeah, he was very accessible in those days, and that's one of the great things about him. And I know he loved New York. So yeah.
Yeah, but I haven't heard many stories, come to think of it, of fans meeting Lennon in public in 71, 72 in New York. Have you?
No, I haven't.
It would be interesting. Because I know there's a story of someone going up to John in 75 in Manhattan, and John's wearing a badge saying, "I love Paul." And then the fan says to John, "Why are you wearing a badge saying I love Paul?" And John says, "Because I love Paul." So I thought it was a great story. But you don't hear stories of fan, or maybe he was just off his head on drugs and was not accessible. A bit like Ringo in his alcoholic years. He was a very prickly customer when it came to fans coming up to him in the street.
Okay.
One was literally warned. I was literally warned not to approach Ringo directly because I wanted to get one of his albums signed. So I just left it with his secretary, and I said, "Can I come back in a week?" And she said, "Sure." And so that's what I did, and he'd signed it for me.
Nice.
But I was told that he was not friendly if you went up and asked for an autograph, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I guess they all went through phases. One day they signed everything, and the next day they told you where to go. You know.
Yeah, I can't blame them a bit for pulling back. I mean, yeah. Well, this album had, there was a little bit of additional fallout. One of the things that I think marred this album by the end of 72 is the United States presidential election, which was a complete shellacking of the side Lennon was on. It was like one state out of 50, McGovern won, one state out of the 50. So Nixon was victorious in a huge way, and it wasn't until 74 where the whole Watergate scandal had Lennon vindicated a bit. But I think this album, it just showed he backed a loser. And at the same time, to boot, you have the United States government trying to get deportation proceedings going to get him kicked out of the country. They probably said, "Hey, man, you can't make an album that bad in this country. You got to get out."
Yeah, I think his whole falling in love with New York City is a fascinating thing to look back on. And this album was a brave attempt to reflect some of what was going on at the time. It's obviously too political. It's a bit dated in terms of the lyrics and stuff. But I was just reminded again of another thing John said in the Andy Peebles interview on December 6th. I can go right out this door now, talking about the Hit Factory, and go in a restaurant. You want to know how great that is? Or go to the movies? People come up and ask for autograph or say hi, but they won't bug you.
Mm.
And then obviously 2 days later, we know what happened. But I'm just thankful that we have this whole period of his life, and maybe he regrets it. Maybe he regretted it to some extent. And I know you're of the opinion he never fully recovered. But I think it was a phase that he had to go through. And I really look forward to the archive edition, because there's plenty of material. I mean, the Madison Square Garden concert, for one, as far as I'm aware, is not officially available anywhere, is it? It was on
I don't think
VHS.
so. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, there are plenty of things that you could make a really extensive box set for this set. So I'm not a big box. I don't think everything needs a big box set commemoration, but it works for this one, because there are politics involved, and there's a lot of other things going on outside of the music that would add to the whole story in which this album was written and recorded.
Yeah. You just don't want any extras from the second disc, right?
Well, I suppose you could slide that in the back, and that can just be ignored if one wants to. But just one other thing I'd like to add about the fallout of this album. It was not long after this, this phase ended, the political phase ended, and it was followed not long after by the Lost Weekend phase. I think this album, it had to be a bit of an embarrassment and a personal artistic failure for Lennon and Ono. And there was a concert they did in Madison Square Garden in August of 72, just after the album came out. And Steve Gebhardt, the filmmaker, had been told by John, quote, "The days of everything being John and Yoko are over." So this led into, 6 months later, they're separated, and that started the next phase of John Lennon. So it's interesting how failure can really, they were so together on this album, and it just failed, and it must have affected their marriage.
Yeah, well, obviously there's that terrible story of what happened on election night when obviously Nixon won the landslide, and so Lennon was depressed, so he got out of his head and basically had sex with another woman in the next door room from where Yoko was at a party. It's just,
yeah.
You can see why they would have split up after that. They didn't split up immediately, but that cannot have helped their marriage at all. So
yeah,
in many ways, many women would never forgive their husband for something like that. So in a way, it's a surprise that they got back together at all after the last weekend. But doesn't often get talked about that event, does it?
The election night, no. I believe it or not, I was to an off-Broadway play of that night, which was somewhat interesting. So that's kind of forefront of my mind. But yeah, they were in for some rough waters, and being in New York, I think I always felt that Lennon, part of the not recovering from the failure of this album, I think also had to do with him not being in England anymore. He seemed to have a more grounded sense of himself in England than in New York. And there's a lot of Rubin and Hoffman types always grabbing at him to, jump on the latest cause. And I think he allowed himself to get pulled into some of that, and it watered down his work, watered down his art, and watered down his marriage.
Yeah, although I think he matured as a human being after all this, and spent the last 5 years of his life in a relatively peaceful state, spending some quality time with Sean, obviously, and just not being bothered about being in Billboard, as you said. He spent the first year of his sabbatical being paranoid that he wasn't being seen in the clubs with Mick Jagger, and then realized that actually there's more to life than just being on the cover of Billboard, which I thought was quite a brave move. I know you probably think he'd run out of steam and stuff, but I kind of admire him for putting his family ahead of his career.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much choice he had in that. I think he was burned out musically. Once Yoko took him back, she kicked him out 18 months earlier, then she kicked him in, and we practically never heard from him again. And I'm not quite sure, this whole house husband thing, I don't deny that he was helping raise the child and all those things, but 5 years is a long time. I mean, I've raised kids myself, and I've held jobs and all kinds of things whilst raising them, and it can be done. So he didn't have a lot to show for that time period outside of this bread baking time. And I wonder what did go on there. And I don't know. That's a topic for another video. And some people are trying to address some of that time period, which is a very long period for him to be inactive. But he was growing older and maturing, and you don't have to keep making hit records. You can take time off. And he did that. So whether it was his idea or not.
When I first got into the Beatles in 1978, obviously Wings were active, but the other three were pretty damn quiet. I mean, George hadn't been heard of for a couple of years. Ringo was putting out albums, but not doing anything commercially, and John was silent. And so up until Double Fantasy, I kept on going back to Walls and Bridges, thinking this could be the last thing he ever puts out. And I'm a big fan of that album. I think it's got a great feel to it. I know Lennon thinks it reflected The Lost Weekend and it sounds miserable, but musicianship is brilliant on it. The words, it's a little bit reminiscent of Plastic Ono Band in places. So if he was truly dried up, then that's a pretty damn good record to go out on. I think he could have kept going. He just didn't have the appetite.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have the passion. It's got to be in you. And by that time, it apparently was not. Because I think musicians and artists, they have to get it out. That's what makes them artists. And he didn't have that feeling anymore. There was nothing to get out, maybe. Until years later when he had some stuff backlogged, But
and then if you listen to those 1980 interviews, it's fascinating because he's so full of energy and he's so looking forward to the future. And one can only guess at the stuff we would have got from him, It's one of those tragedies that we're never going to get over.
Yeah, I think he had at least one very solid album left in him that could have come out in the 80s. I think that would have been a good time for him. Obviously, Julian started recording then. And I don't know that he and Yoko would have remained together. Had they split up, that would have opened up a lot of doors for John Lennon. So who knows?
Might have sent him back to the bottle.
Or send him back to Paul, which very nearly happened just before Yoko took him back.
And everyone everyone blames Yoko for that, but I don't think John was really keen on the idea, because in the Lennon, if you read the Lennon letters book edited by Hunter Davis,
I think so.
there's a couple of
Excerpts,
letters he writes around the time of 75, and he's saying Linda is desperate for me to get back with Paul, and he's kind of being a little bit derogatory about, Linda being obsessed with John and Paul getting back together. I think they would have been friends more and met up more regularly had John not got back together with Yoko, but they did meet up at the Dakota a couple of times and spent a couple of jolly evenings together. So
yeah,
one
I
is
don't make
thankful
too much.
for that.
I don't make too much out of the New Orleans. I think Lennon may have gone there and appeared on a couple of tracks, not much more than that. The Dakota visits you just mentioned, were I think the last couple times really, because after that, Yoko kind of put the kibosh on incoming calls, and there were some issues along the way that John and Paul didn't talk much during that time period. And there are accounts of calls not going through and things like that. Although John, I think, could have picked up the phone himself, but it was very odd. It seemed like there was a time period, the 18-month period where John Lennon had the Lost Weekend up till about 1976, and all of a sudden, bam, the numerology was not favorable. Let's put it that way. That's the excuse. The numerology wasn't favorable for John Lennon to see Paul McCartney. So
yeah, have you seen that Michael Lindsay Hogg film Two of Us, which is about John and Paul together in 76?
no, I have not seen that. Is it any good?
Yeah, it's excellent. I think it's on YouTube.
Hmm.
I only just realized it was directed by Michael Lindsay Hogg recently, because he met Paul on holiday just after it came out, and Paul was very complimentary about it, said he liked it. It's basically about a semi-hypothetical meeting between John and Paul at the Dakota. So Linda and Yoko are not present, and they sort of spend a bit of time getting to know each other. They share a joint, they go for a walk in the park, they go to a coffee shop. It's just a brilliant film. You've got to check it out.
Okay, I'll put that on my list. Thank you.
Kind of loosely based on The Last Meeting from 76, because when they were watching, is it Saturday Night Live? And
oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
the host was saying, come down and we'll give you $3,000 if you reform, or some joke figure.
Yeah.
And John and Paul were together at the Dakota, and they almost got in a cab and went down. So that's in the film. So it's semi based on faith, on facts, and semi fictional.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think that's a good place to stop on this review, John. How about we do one more on a George album next?
I think George is definitely going to be next. He deserves to be talked about. So we could pick any of his albums. I'm really not fussed. Rather do one of his 70s albums, if it's okay with you.
Oh yeah, I'm for that. Well, let's leave the audience guessing. We won't commit right now, but thank you for having me on your channel, and maybe we'll move the next one over to mine.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for coming on, Matt. Good discussion. We didn't always agree, but then it would be boring if we always did. So
great, thank you.